Hi, this is Jim Krut, the helicopter zombie from George Romero's Dawn of the Dead, and you are listening, lucky listener, to the Movie Raid Show.
It's time for the movie raid, and tonight's victim is actor Jim Krut, has done Dawn of the Dead as the helicopter zombie, and Brain Hunter New Breed, amongst many, many others. Hello.
Hello, Mike.
What have we been up to lately? I know you got some signings and previous independent films. Can you describe a little bit like that? Can you promote a little bit that we haven't checked out yet?
Many folks might be familiar with me as the helicopter zombie from Dawn of the Dead, and even though I've done a number of other films, that one still seems to come to the front, or the top, or off the top, however it goes. One of the recent ones I did was as a newscaster, Bill Wagon, in Brain Hunter, 1987, New Breed, which is just out this year. Did a short piece with The Only Ones. I had about 4 lines, but, I made them slow so I'd have more screen time.
Having such limited roles, like how do you feel like when you get like limited lines? And I understand that like mobility in certain scenes can be pretty chaotic, especially if you're having to reshoot anything. But do you prefer to have less lines so you can get a bigger impact of the role that you play in your perspective, especially in the indie circuit?
It's interesting because I did a lot of theater, live stage in Pittsburgh for about 7 years before I did Dawn of the Dead. And one of my favorite plays has always been Dracula. And if you look at the script and count the lines that Dracula has, there aren't that many lines, but yet he's the title character. Everybody knows him. There's always a saying in theater or on stage, there are no small parts, there are only small actors. I'm 6'4". Of course, I'm going to stick out no matter where you put me. But whatever role you have, you just try to sink everything you can possibly bring to the table and put it into that role. Give it your all each and every time. Of course, if you're working in theater, you have to know the entire play from the beginning to the end to know where your cues are and, your character development and everything. And you get one shot to do it. But when you're working in film, you bring your best shot to it, and then the director says, I think the lighting's off a little bit on it. All right, let's run that again. And then it's up, the audio's a little, the plane went over or something like that. So you repeat and you repeat oftentimes. And so one of the challenges of working in film versus working in theater is that you have to keep repeating that same energy and that same piece of emotion, even though in the next scene that emotion might change to be convincing. It is a challenge. On the other hand, it's a challenge I love.
You mentioned about performing from theater all the way to getting that role in Dawn of the Dead. Was that more for a build of character than credibility for you at that time?
Tom Savini, who did most all of the makeup and effects in Dawn of the Dead, done many other wonderful films and has his own makeup and effects school. Tom and I had gone to college together. And after college, we both were in the military. He went to Vietnam as a combat photographer. I went as a combat medic. We came back afterward and had those experiences in our heads. But we'd also worked together in theater in college. So when I was back in Pittsburgh, Tom asked me if I would like to do this role in a George Romero film, and I knew nothing about it. Went to Tom's house, workshop, and we did the head castings, plaster crack. I had to come back a couple days later. We did that again. Then I went on to set about 2 weeks after that. So it all kind of came as a rush in between working and performing and rehearsing. Just something I was able to fit into the work schedule at the time, but it was an absolute delight and a thrill to be part of it.
Now, based on your iconic death scene from Dawn of the Dead, infusing yourself into the indie horror, has self-doubt or judgment ever came in motion that others recognize you only for that performance? Did that ever either change your course of performance to almost outdo that but still be memorable for it? Has that ever changed for you?
It's hard to get away from it. There's always that thread sort of running through. When I left Pittsburgh in the 1980s, although I did some stage work, I didn't do any film until about the year 2000. And I left work in order to get to an audition, and I kind of rushed in to do the audition. I was still filling out my paperwork, and they said, well, we'll get to that later. And they said, you're the last one here today, so we'll just talk with you. And I walked in and we started talking. And 2 guys, the director and producer, are there, and I said, he'd be perfect for this particular role. Okay, great. And we're going to give you a call, later to confirm. Well, later that day, the director called me. He said, my God, why didn't you tell me you were the helicopter zombie in Dawn of the Dead? I said, I didn't think it was relevant to this role. I had no idea. He said, really, it doesn't matter, but it's pretty cool. And there have been several times in independent films where people say, hey, I've got this great role for you. What we're going to do is take a machete and cut off the top of your head. Wouldn't that be cool? No, it would not be cool. And thank you anyway. I really would not rather do the role. Turned down several films because of that. I want to protect the integrity of that Dawn of the Dead moment and the brand, as it were. I don't want to kind of cheapen it. Now, there's some things we've been able to do to kind of work around, but people know what I do. They've worked with me. I've worked in community theater here in Gettysburg for like 7 years. We formed our own theater company. We did some pretty innovative stuff. When I worked in Pittsburgh, we had a touring company. We went from Chicago to Scotland to MIT to Spoleto Festival. I mean, we did a lot of travel. So I've had a lot of exposure. People have seen me in other films. They've met me. We were doing a showing. Actually, very quickly, I did a performance of Dracula with Gettysburg Stage here in Gettysburg. And afterward, as a fundraiser for the theater, I was doing autographs from Dawn of the Dead. And one of the patrons who was at the theater said, "Hey, I am a projectionist, and I'd like it if you could come to our theater and we will show the original Dawn of the Dead, followed by the remake of Dawn of the Dead, and in between times we'll have a table set up and you can do autographs and talk to fans and such." And I said, "That sounds wonderful." As I was doing those autographs in the middle, a fellow came up and said, "Hey, I'm working on a film. I'd like you to do this particular role. Would you be interested?" And I said, "Yeah, I'd like to see the script." And we did, and it was an awful lot of fun. That was Deadlands 2, Trapped, and the director was Gary Ugaric, and I got to play Dr. Robert Mitchell, who is an absolute, it starts with a B and ends with a D word. It's kind of a government official. Of course, there are oftentimes a lot of, evil government officials you can model yourself after, but it seemed like a particularly good time for that one. From that, other people said, "Hey, I saw you in this, I saw you in that." So it hasn't been difficult, but I have been a little selective. There's also a thing with independent films, and I try to support independent filmmakers, simply because that's where the originality is coming from. They're willing to take chances. They're not risking millions of dollars and somebody's breathing over their neck. They're trying to do a particular approach, effect, a storyline, and so I try to support that. You win, sometimes you lose, but if you can advance the art a little bit, it's always a win.
When you have been known for something like that, you have to be smart about it, because you can be stereotyped, not just as an actor from certain roles, but as that particular moment of the role that you were famed for, and you don't want to be repetitive, and you don't want to make yourself be repetitive, because you yourself are going to be losing character of what you're presenting for, what you're going for, and you can't grow as that artist in the craft and further get in other projects and bigger projects and so forth to really branch out, because everybody wants you to just keep replaying the exact same moment what you were famed for, and it's dull, it's boring, and it is a cheap way try to get somebody on your film trying to, "Hey, guy, I got so-and-so and he's famous for doing this and we're going to just do this again." It is not good, and it really cheapens the artists themselves, and it's almost like an insult in a way, because you're not really giving the faith and trust into this actor that was that own brand for that. You can't just repeat the same thing over and over like that and expect the same achieve of a success like that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your saying that, and that it's a reinforcement, because I think it is a special piece of a particular film, and it has a particular place in the hearts of many fans.
What do you think really captivates of your characters that you play in your other films? Like, do you think it's the realness of the character, or is it really the influence of your character that you perform that really captivates? And when I say captivate, I use that as an actual key word, as what captivates for you.
I've done a doctor a couple times, and again, having been a medic, I kind of fell into that. Maybe I look professorial, doctoral. I've been cast several times in a uniform with a badge. Most recently, we have one which is a werewolf film called Full Moon Fever, which should be out, I think, in December of this year. David Madison is the director of that. It's going to be a good film. And the interesting thing is, I did a film, Darkness Waits, and I played like a conservation officer, and the director from that, the cinematographer, are now married, and the three of us were cast in the same scenes, Full Moon Fever, which is coming up. And I said, this, some years later, is exactly the same shirt and badge that I had before, and I brought along my own unique hat for that particular scene in Darkness Waits. I thought, I wonder if people will make that connection, because for me, it's just a bit of fun. The former director for Darkness Waits, we're in the same scene together, and we also shot at one of the same filming locations. I just thought that was a hoot and a half. There are little things like that I find kind of special. When we did Brain Hunter, The New Breed, they said, okay, what's the name you want, for like the newscaster? And I said, well, look, How about if we make his name Bill Wagon, Wagon. Now, in Dawn of the Dead, there's a news helicopter that the people escape in, and it's from WGON. I don't know how many people might pick up on that. It's a bit of fun in there.
Our horror films that have elements that are like really good, but didn't really make the mark because of other elements that just didn't work well, but had some good ideas with it. And then there are other films that just became something much more like it opened more eyes to the public. It gave something new, something interesting for the horror community to grasp, and as well as filmmakers. So being a part of that's what I meant by captivating something that carry that with you everywhere you go, no matter what role you're offered, because that was that moment. And do you feel that it's almost a little rare sometimes to carry something like that with you?
You know, one of my favorite singers is Tom Waits, and one of the first times I saw him in a movie, I saw, wait a minute, that looks kind of like Tom Waits. Hey, that boy can act. So for whatever film you're working on, you have to do something or be the character that is unique, not like, hey, I'm John Wayne and I always talk like this. Now I'm a Marine, now I'm in the Civil War, now I'm an astronaut, and it's always the same John Wayne. Can you do something a little different that fits that character, that is also memorable, that kind of strikes the audience in a way that, ooh, there's something odd about that, or engaging, or warm, or identifiable, or lovable, whatever the case may be, because it is really a matter of audience connection. And you still have to be the character. So it's a lot of juggling going on, actually. If you're trying to do the best you can with the role, the audience will pick up on that and not necessarily think, oh, there's so-and-so and he did. No, they're going with the character you've just now created. That, to me, is the success. The impact of Dawn of the Dead, that role as the helicopter zombie, but like every band, that became famous, say, in the 90s, and now they're doing concerts, and people want to hear what they did in the 90s. It's sort of the same thing, except that in film, you get to evolve. You can be different characters. I could be a sheriff. I could be a businessman. I could be a doctor. I could be a conservation officer. I could be a gas station attendant. How do you become all of those things? Some of it's life experience, some of it's studying what other people in that capacity do or have done, or what strikes you about that particular role. What kind of excitement can you bring to it? Even if it's a horrible kind of person, you kind of have to bring a love for that person to your portrayal.
These are key elements that you have to continue to remember and continue to strive for, because all these other distractions in between having to get fame for your name, your roles, whatever films, and trying to go for that, those are just little things that should be underneath you, and what you're going for. The direction is really the most important. What direction do you feel you need to go to? You shouldn't forget what you've done in the past, because it's really just a buildup of what you're going in the future, and that's where the importance is, regardless of where you're going, which genre it is. And you have to remember the important things, all this press and everything else that's going on in between while you're doing this, because that also too will affect you and your mentality of how to perform.
You're exactly right, but you did mention a direction, and I wanted to commend all of the directors that I've worked with for the guidance they've given me, the shape they've helped to give to the role, to the character, to my understanding of what that character's role is in the overall picture of the film. Oftentimes, the actors get celebrated, and at times it might be, well, not necessarily their choice of how they would have done that role. The director may have reshaped that performance because the director saw something different about the character that the character or the actor himself may not have seen. You might have been very convincing as in a particular role, but is that what the director was looking for in the back of his mind that you weren't aware of? So that's why he's pulling this out of you. And then you see it on screen, you say, man, I was brilliant. I was just brilliant. And then you think back, yeah, I wouldn't have been so brilliant if the director hadn't pushed me a little in that direction, offered this, suggested, given me a little nudge that way. Just want to say, directors have a tremendous influence on the quality of the performances. Now, some actors can do, well, gee, I can do whatever I want to do if you're Marlon Brando, but most of the rest of us want to do a good job with the character and that film. They want to make that film as outstanding as possible. And yet when people ask about Dawn of the Dead, and they say, well, did you know at the time, back in 1978 or 1977 when you were shooting it, that this was going to be a worldwide sensation, translated into many languages. You'd have a fan base that would persist for the next 50 years at least. Well, none of us did. George Romero did a wonderful job. He brought in wonderful actors. He brought in Goblin, for soundtrack, the sets, the imagination. Everything was superb. It was wonderful. It's a quality movie, but If the fans don't like it, it doesn't make a difference. If the fans like it, it doesn't matter what it is. You can put your best into it, and you really need to do that. But if the fans aren't exposed to it, and if the fans don't appreciate what you've just done, well, you're just one more in a long line of films that don't get seen very often.
What made this the pinnacle of what we are today? And I think that's the most important thing, is we have to look back to make something in the future, to what we can look forward in the future. That's just how I feel about this, because this is where artists are made. This is where the art form is continuing to be reformed and shaped. People involved, the directors, and everybody that helps shape this is where it's supposed to be. It's not supposed to be anything less than that.
I'm with you.
Go ahead and plug in any websites, or if you care to add anything you care to add in general before we get out here.
Well, I do have a site on Facebook, Jim Krut, Krut. I have my website, Helizombie, Helizombie, which usually lists appearances. I also have a lot of my photos there from Dawn of the Dead, hoodies and tanks and tees and dolls, action figures, that sort of thing. So that's helizombie.com, Helizombie. I just hope everybody had a wonderful Halloween. There's some great films being made specifically for Halloween. I know a couple of them have been delayed, and I would offer a little note again to Full Moon Fever, because that should be coming out around December. Z-E-R-O, as in Zombie Hero, C-Hero. And that should be probably 2023, sometime coming out. And I have a short role in that as well. And it's a lot of fun. First-time filmmaker, but Nashville singer Wesley Spangler. And I just think it's kind of a guerrilla film in terms of the filmmaking tactics, but just the cooperation, the ensemble feeling that people got from it. It should be fun to see when it comes out. So those are my only other plugs at this point.
And there you have it, everybody. That is actor Jim Krut.
Thank you very much for having me, Mike. Thanks for keeping the dead alive, and the rest of us, too.